Hello, welcome to Bookworms. I'm your host, Alex, and with me, as always, is my fantastic brother, the oldest first of his kind, Joe.
Hello.
How you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing just fine, thanks.
You look a little tired.
Yeah, we gotta do this earlier in the morning or something like that. After a long day of doing nothing, and then I have to come here and do something, and it's just the worst.
So, how about Alex, you tell us what we're doing here today?
So, Bookworms is a book review podcast where Joe and I will read a book, we'll get together and then talk about that book.
And why are we doing this instead of, listening to the thousands of others of podcasts that do the same thing?
Because they don't read good books like we do.
That is true.
We read the absolute best. If you want garbage recommendations from garbage podcasts, listen to those other guys because we're fantastic and you're going to love every single book that we choose.
So these are going to be 16 books that we have chosen. 14 are books that we absolutely love, and two that we don't love so much. And as you heard last month, the first book we are going to do is Anansi Boys by Neil Gaiman. So, Alex, why did you pick this book?
Yeah, so this is one of my selections. I picked it for a number of reasons. Number one is I am a big fan of the author. So Neil Gaiman he's probably one of the most famous authors of his generation.
Definitely one of the most famous living authors.
Yes. He's been writing since the late 80s. He's very well known for the Sandman comic books. That was his first big claim to fame. He did Good Omens with Terry Pratchett. His books, American Gods, Stardust, Ocean at the End of the Lane, The Graveyard Book, they've all been massive hits.
Many turned into movies or TV shows.
Yeah. What do you think the best Neil Gaiman adaptation is, and why is it Good Omens?
I don't know. American Gods is up there too, but Good Omens is easily my favorite book, and I mean, that show is wow.
It was a lot of fun. Anytime you want to see David Tennant dressed like a English nanny. Well, that's Good Omens. We maybe someday we'll read that one, but today we're doing Anansi Boys. So, if you're unfamiliar with this book, it came out in 2005. It is a loose sequel to American Gods.
And how is it a loose sequel? Is it tied to it, or is it just something that it's like an offshoot?
The only thing it really has in common with American Gods is the character Anansi appears in both. The tones of the book are very different. There's it's an entirely original story with very different characters. So yeah, the only thing that those two have in common is the one character. However, I like this one for a number of reasons. It's almost entirely just straight comedy. Neil Gaiman likes to incorporate a lot of different literary styles. He'll be very dramatic. He'll incorporates a lot of humor. It gets very into like mysticality and fantasy. This one is just straight up comedic fantasy. Lots of family-based humor, and yes, it's his. I find it to be his funniest book. It's also really one of the few books he has left that has not gotten the Hollywood treatment. It's not adapted into television or film, and honestly, I think that's kind of a crime because it's a very fun book, and I think it would translate very well onto the screen. I would watch it anyway.
Okay, so yeah, we'll start off with reading the back of the book to let people know what it's about.
We're operating off of different editions here, so
Yeah.
we'll see who has the better back of the book description.
So, when Fat Charlie's dad named something, it stuck. Like calling Fat Charlie, Fat Charlie. Even now, 20 years later, Charlie and Nancy can't shake that name, one of the many embarrassing gifts his father bestowed, before he dropped dead on a karaoke stage and ruined Fat Charlie's life. Because Mr. Nancy left Fat Charlie things. Things like the stranger who shows up on Charlie's doorstep, who appears to be the brother he never knew. And all of a sudden, life starts getting very interesting for Fat Charlie. Neil Gaiman journeys deep into myth to bring us a tale playful, profound, and rife with mayhem and mischief. An audacious and inspired story of family, luck, deceit, and an unusual legacy that illuminates the divine in our humanity. Not to mention a lime.
Okay, so your book description was better than mine. Mine's a lot shorter and basically covers less than half that, so I won't even read it. So first things first, we're gonna just quickly give our thoughts on the book. I'll go first if that's all right.
Fine. I know you're jealous to be first for something.
I'm still the favorite. All right. So my thoughts on the book, if you haven't been able to tell already, is I love it. I think it is probably one of Gaiman's top 5 works. It's very hard to choose what my favorite Neil Gaiman story is because he's a very enjoyable writer. He's got a very special way with words, and that's one of the reasons he just really stands out as a writer. Anansi Boys is easily his funniest book. He might he when he writes for TV and things like that. Those are also pretty good. But I just really enjoyed reading this story, and I was laughing out loud in parts. There's all these cases of mistaken identity and double entendre, and just the main character Charlie getting caught in embarrassing situations and not knowing how to get out of them and just looking like an absolute fool. That there's plenty there to keep you engaged, and at the same time, there's a great storyline flowing through it with all these fun things happening, like his father dying, very fun, and meeting his brother, and then his brother stealing his girl, and then Charlie has to find a way to banish his brother. Then he does it just in a terrible way, and he has to fix that, and it all comes down to him trying to fight mythological beasts that are trying to reclaim stories from his father, who he finds out throughout during the story that is a god. And so it's very wild. It's very fun. Everything's funny about it. Even some of the dramatic parts have humor coursing throughout it. So I could keep gushing about it if you really wanted me to, but I want to hear what you think about it, Joe.
Well, quite honestly, it is a good book. Not one of my favorites. You know, definitely a 4 out of 5 stars if I had to say, which for Neil Gaiman is kind of low. His American God books, um, his Graveyard book, Sandman series, Neverwhere, they were all better in a way. This book seems to be lacking something. I can't really say what it is, but compared to all of his other writings, it just doesn't have that same power behind it. American Gods is a giant epic of a saga following Norse gods, along with a lot of other gods through the American, not dream, but failed dream, I guess. Neverwhere, the underbelly of London, and and an Alice in Wonderland style story. Graveyard book, Ocean at the End of the Lane, being great. Just children's stories, even though they're not really made for children. Though my children did seem to enjoy them to some extent.
Yeah, I
But yeah,
think Graveyard Book and Ocean at the End of the Lane were described as books for all ages.
yeah, that and Coraline, the children definitely loved to be terrified of that one. But again, all those books, have a definite high place in my heart, and this one is just not quite there. It's funny, it's intriguing, it draws you in, just not my top choice for this author.
Well, you're wrong.
What's new?
No, I see some of your points there. I mean, kind of listing off all of his books like that. He has just kind of banger after banger.
Yeah, I mean,
He's a great writer.
and that's not even mentioning Good Omens with Terry Pratchett, who's by far my probably favorite author of all time, and that book is just hilarious. And so this book, without Pratchett putting in his humor, when you stand them side by side, just isn't quite. I said the same level. It's still good, just not epic.
Yeah, I'd say it's. I would disagree on the epic part. I mean, it's almost like a mini epic, which is an oxymoron. Uh, so
Kind of like you.
uh, so I mean, American
And
God.
don't you dare edit that out.
American Gods is this big sprawling epic, and it's very detailed, and it's a fabulous book. This one, it pulls way back on the details, the amount of characters, the motivations of the villains, and has a much more smaller, concise story. However, it does still have that growth and of the characters. Every character has their own arc, and by the end of the story, they're different people, except for Graham Coates, who just kind of makes things worse for himself as everything goes along.
Yeah. So let's hop into it, and we're gonna start with who is Anansi, and just as a little side here, uh, it's called is pronounced Anansi or Anansi. Just know that we're a couple of white boys from New England that slur our words a little bit, so sometimes it won't, or the pronunciation won't be quite there. We apologize.
Yeah, there are some terms in the book that are hard to pronounce, so we're doing our best. You'll have to bear with us. So, who is Anansi? Should we start with who's Anansi in the book, or who is Anansi in the great pantheon of religion
Let's
and
start with
mythology?
a pantheon of African mythology.
Okay, so Anansi is what's known as a trickster. He's probably the second best known trickster in the world. I would say.
Third, third,
You think third?
yeah.
Because I put Loki above
Coyote.
him. Coyote. Oh, yeah, I guess Coyote.
Who would you put it?
I put Loki first. He's
Yeah.
like,
Loki's first.
especially with like all the Marvel movies, everyone knows who Loki is, even though that's a bitch version of Loki.
And I mean, in America, anyways, Coyote is very well known in American native mythology.
American folklore. Yeah, I would see that. So going back to Anansi though, whether he's second or third, he's still one of the great tricksters. A trickster. For those of you who don't know a lot about ancient mythology, a trickster is a god or a demigod that is generally weaker than all the other gods. That forces them to rely on wit and cunning to be able to survive in a world where otherwise strength is king. So Anansi, hundreds and hundreds of stories about him, and he likes to, living up to his name as a trickster, he likes to play tricks on the other animals because they're strong but they're dim-witted, and he's so much more intelligent than they are. Sometimes his plans work out great. Sometimes he gets himself into a ton of trouble. Sometimes he flat out dies. He always comes back though.
Yeah, and
Most of
sorry, and just to say this, Anansi is from the region in Africa, Ghana. When we say African mythology, Africa is a very big old place with many different levels and locations of mythology. So
there's thousands of cultures and subcultures
yeah,
within Africa.
but this is one of the more popularized, especially in the UK and America, due to the slave trade and bringing a lot of Africans from that region into these countries.
And even in the American Gods TV show, like the first time we meet Anansi in the first season, he is it's shown as a flashback where he's leading slaves on a slave ship in a revolt against their captors. So,
So in the story, kind of who is Anansi and how big of a part of the story is he?
so Anansi is Fat Charlie's father. We don't find that out right away, but I mean the book's called Anansi Boys. It's pretty obvious who Mr. Nancy is. He plays probably the most important role in the book, even though he dies on page 2. His Fat Charlie, the book starts with him. He's engaged to be married to Rosie, and he's trying to contend with like his relationship with his father has really defined who he is as an adult. He's estranged from his father. He only found out he was dead because his neighbor had to do a long distance call from Florida to England to be able to reach him. However, like he's constantly embarrassed by his father's actions. Like the back of the book says, like Anansi gave Charlie the nickname Fat Charlie, which is a name he's never been able to escape, even though he's not that fat.
Though he is a little chubby, at least it's hinted at. And he was definitely a chubby child. But yeah, this is definitely a book about Anansi's children and they're growing up even though they're already adults and figuring out their place in the world as demigods.
Fat Charlie does not know that he's a demigod. However, his brother Spider is very well aware of it and uses all those trickster abilities to cheat and manipulate his way into whatever he wants to do whenever he wants to do it. That's one thing I also like about this book is that kind of family dynamic, which is on this godlike level,
But it's
because
still brotherly fights, like as cheap as they always are, as we can attest to.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they only know each other for a couple days throughout the span of the book, and yeah, they get into fights, they bicker, they argue, and I think in the end, it all boils down to them trying to reconcile their relationships with their father and come to terms with things that he was good at, things that he failed at.
So why is Fat Charlie feeling a constant shame, even though nothing shameful happens to him? I mean, we know that Anansi likes to play tricks on him and whatnot, but there's never any time where it's malicious or anything that a common person would feel true shame out of, but Charlie is constantly mortified about.
I can think of probably two reasons that he feels that constant shame and embarrassment. Like throughout the book, like it's clearly stated, Fat Charlie hates being embarrassed. He goes to great lengths to avoid it. For example, like he only has the entry level jobs that he never stays at for more than 2 years, and he keeps maintains a low profile. He's got very few friends. He avoids singing whenever he can.
A lot of it
And
too is he's just naive and gullible when his father would say, "Hey, like the president joke where he told Nancy told Fat Charlie that there's a on President's Day everyone would dress up as their favorite president in school, and whoever got the best costume won a prize." And
he
who
goes
did
to
Charlie
school
go as?
dresses up like Taft. Something about getting stuck in a bathtub, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And then there's the kind of the thing where his father talks about the mermaid on the beach and how Charlie believes that there's a mermaid and then as always feels like a fool when there is no mermaid.
yeah, and we find out eventually that it all boils down to the fact that Anansi and his brother Spider are not Anansi. Charlie and his brother Spider are the same person separated into two people, and Spider inherited all the confidence and the godlike abilities and the charm, whereas Charlie is all of the apprehension and the shame and the embarrassment, a lot more of the negative aspects.
Yeah, and I guess we can jump into why were they split? Why were the personalities split into two people?
They pissed off their neighbor. They broke something in their neighbor's yard, and she was a powerful witch, and she pulled out everything she didn't like about Charlie and made another person out of him, which was Spider, and then sent him to live elsewhere.
Yeah. And this witch-like person is accompanied by, was it three other old ladies that very much resemble your typical witches in these stories, like Macbeth or
Yeah, the Fates, they call them,
yeah,
where they are very all knowing, very all powerful. They almost exist outside the story. They know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and
even
they
though these ones are kind of more goofy about it and more haphazard in their spell making and tips to Fat Charlie.
they're portrayed as like the generic old Southern lady who's cooking up a storm and force having feasts and talking about making geriatric jokes.
Another important thing with the book that is important to talk about. Uh, what does character race have to do with the story? Why is it important? As we said earlier, this is based in African myth, and in the story, all the characters are black unless otherwise mentioned. Where, in reading an interview from Neil Gaiman where he answers this question, he says that essentially in most books, since our cultures in this part of the Western world are typically white centric, they do the opposite. The characters automatically assumed as white, and if they're different, the author will write that in. So he was going to turn that trope on its head and base it off of you know as if the not as if but as the blacks culture being the dominant one. And as we learn pretty quickly, Graham Coates, who is the villain of the story, I believe you have a good quote of his description, Alex.
Oh yes, yeah. Graham Coates is described as an albino ferret in an expensive suit.
So some good comedy there and some good imagery.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like you can read the book. It's very. They never really directly state the race of any of the characters. It's just kind of expected that that these characters are going to be black. These stories or the character Anansi originates in Africa, and therefore, if you're an educated person at all, you'd probably be able to safely assume the character's races. I really didn't feel that overall, beyond the fact that race is an important thing to a lot of people. A lot of people take pride in their history and all that. Um,
I mean, and like for me, having reread this book after reading that interview, it was definitely something where I kept finding myself picturing maybe not Fat Charlie or Anansi, but a lot of the other characters as more white, centric, and then having to kind of go back in my head and definitely change their appearances to more fit, what would be expected if it was an all African American or African uh, English cast. And it was definitely a fun and interesting exercise to force myself not to picture people and my biased idealistic visions of characters and look at it from someone else's point of view.
yeah, you often picture characters being either the race of the author or your own race. So yes, it is fun to watch another perspective being told.
So, another question I pulled off the interwebs.
Great show prep.
Uh, what does the author mean when he talks about a woman having the hysterics? So, about where in the book was this? Do you remember?
So this was, if I'm not mistaken, around uh, talking about the circumstances of Anansi's death
Yep.
early in the book, where he dies doing karaoke, trying to hit on a bunch of women that are a third of his age, and then he just full on just dies and falls on one lady.
I believe it was a bachelorette party.
Just bachelorette party, and they wind up having hysterics in the bathroom because uh, their night was took a very sudden and shocking twist. So crying, inconsolable, all those things that you might associate with a woman having hysterics with. It does lead into a interesting conversation about how some of the women are treated in this book by both Anansi and Spider, where they're treated almost as commodities rather than actual people. Because like Spider, throughout especially the early parts of the book, he treats like the male characters like they don't really matter, and he is constantly pursuing, especially Rosie, but even on the night of Wine, Women, and Song that he and Charlie go out into, he chooses women that they're the most fun. They're cool to hang out with.
Yeah, the
It,
party girls.
yeah, the party girls. Nothing wrong with that. However, he also he does some very questionable things.
Yeah, objectifies them.
He objectifies them. He uses his powers to manipulate Rosie into thinking he's Charlie, and then sleeps with her.
So yeah, let's get a little bit more into the two main females in the story, Rosie and Daisy. And as I gotta point out to my brother, who is so good at finding things but missed this,
I'm not a
they're,
biologist, okay?
they're both flowers, and in particular, roses are kind of thorny, even though considered traditionally beautiful, which matches kind of the Rosie of this book. And then Daisy, who, while usually less attractive than the fancy flowers like roses, are still kind of cute and fun, but don't, and more common, but they don't sting you. So which kind of, even though Daisy we find out is a cop and is now trying to figure out, what crimes Charlie may or may have not committed. She at no point is ever thorny or, stinky or any of those other characteristics that some flowers can, have to ruin one's day.
Yeah, whereas Rosie is very controlling in a relationship with Charlie. She she's waiting till marriage before they consummate their relationship. She's very nice. However,
She really has no feelings for Charlie
yeah,
other than
yeah,
getting back at her mother.
yeah, her mother is very thorny.
Very controlling.
So there's some fun mother-in-law humor throughout the book, kind of describing her relationship with Charlie. Rosie does end up becoming, I guess, a victim of Spider's manipulations. He eventually falls in love with her, and comes clean to her, which she breaks up with him, which would be expected.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, if you lied to a woman about your complete identity, I mean, wouldn't you expect her to be a little pissed off?
I don't know. I'm married, so I can bow out of these.
It's called True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
That just mentioning that put everything into perspective now. Like Rosie does end up getting back together with Spider at the end. Is his kind of redemption arc with her? Is it earned, or because that's it's a huge breach of trust. You're using magic to manipulate someone into bending to your will.
I mean, going to the end, you can kind of also see Charlie and Spider flipping roles, where Charlie was the banal, bland, kind of chubby nobody, whereas and Spider was the playboy. By the end, Charlie becomes the jazz singer, skinny, almost like his father type personality, and Spider becomes what was he become at the end?
He becomes a restaurateur.
Yeah,
Yeah, I wouldn't say they fully flip. They become closer to each other.
yeah. I mean, it's definitely more balanced, but it's
Yeah, because like
but they definitely flip the coin. Maybe not to the extreme that making it sound like, but it's a definite flip, and
yeah,
they both become more balanced.
yeah,
That's the big thing.
yeah. Because Charlie never really becomes a playboy, but yes, he becomes a confident jazz singer. When in the beginning of the book, he wouldn't even get up on stage and stand there. But yeah, he's married with a child by the end of the book. Whereas Spider's still maintaining some of that tricksterness, just where he's kind of refusing to have kids so he can piss off his mother-in-law.
So
Yeah,
let's talk about Graham Coates a little bit.
we gotta
What do we?
talk about the bad guy.
Yeah, we spent all this time about everything else, and then after that we'll talk about the namesake of the book. But let's talk about
Yeah.
the bad guy first.
Yeah, so Graham is an interesting villain. He's one of the reasons I really like this book is because he's such a slimy worm of a human being, but his portrayal is done like he's probably also one of the funniest characters in the book, just because he's so like weird and he says stupid things like absentatively, things that just like little things that irk you
Yeah.
as a reader.
And he thinks
That
he's
he
so clever with everything and some mastermind at manipulation.
Yeah, when in reality he's just another scuzzy guy who's embezzling from his own company, and then he gets in way over his head and cuts and runs.
Spider kind of catches him by accident, and as while portraying himself as Fat Charlie, and Graham Coates freaks out and starts pulling out before he's truly ready, and in the process, killing another woman named Maeve and creating a whole other story arc there.
Yeah, his
And
killing of Maeve definitely changes him a little bit. Like he was clearly ready to bug out whenever whenever the shit hit the fan.
Alex, I can't see your air quotes when you make them.
Well, they were for me. But yeah, he was ready to bug out when the shit hit the fan. He was he had all his money stored away in the private accounts, and he just had to all he had to do was pick up a bag and leave, and he was gone forever.
And then also the killing of Maeve kind of connects him to the immaterial world, the mythological world that Spider is more a part of and Anansi is more a part of, where you get the pantheons, where you have Spider and monkey, bird, and the big one, tiger.
Yeah, which that act of aggressive violence. I mean, he kills a woman with a hammer. That act of strength and violence and heartlessness does open him up to Tiger, who comes in, and they end up merging together into one person.
Yeah, and Tiger and Spider have their fight, where Charlie and Graham have their fight, and it really ends up being Rosie's mom especially, and Maeve's ghost to have to be able to cross that bridge between the two of them to break them apart again. Well, not so much break them apart, but to defeat the combination. Instead of just the brothers combining, they needed further outside help, even though they're never fully aware of that extra help.
Yeah, there's that whole bit where Rosie and her mother get kidnapped, but they go on a cruise and they go to an island, and that find out coincidentally that's where Graham Coates has run off to, and he kidnaps them and stores them in his meat locker. And all that happens without Spider or Charlie knowing anything about it because they're so busy trying to. Well, Charlie's busy trying to find. Oh, he's trying to find his neighbor who's on the island as well, and Spider's been captured by Tiger, and they're battling in the mythical realm. And the whole time, like Tiger's coming together with Graham Coates and taking on an earthly appearance using that albino ferret.
Yeah, and I mean the whole thing of them meeting up. There's that theory of there's only you only ever truly meet 500 people in your life, and you just continually run into those 500 people. So it's kind of a play off of that little ethos. And then you also have the other, minor bad guy, which is Bird, who uses comical ways to try to kill or haunt Spider.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite bits in the book. Was it's almost like when the tides start to turn between Charlie and Spider's relationship, they make up for their indiscretions towards each other while they're being constantly attacked by birds, and Spider has to transport them from place to place. Like they go to the desert, and they get attacked by vultures. They transport themselves to Antarctica. They get attacked by penguins. They go to Paris and are attacked by pigeons. And they wind up in like a coal mine somewhere in the middle of nowhere to get away from it all. And like during that time, they're bonding together.
And the whole idea of Bird was to, harassing Spider and Charlie was to make Tiger regain his confidence because he had been so humiliated by Spider or by Anansi so many times that he had lost his gumption, his ability to, do violence without thought. And that kind of gets us into our question leading back to Anansi and Tiger. If Anansi owns these stories, and if he stole Tiger's stories, is that a parable that the modern age has shifted from brute strength to smarts?
Well, that's a
You
good
being
question.
you being a brainiac and not very strong, like
Yeah.
your brother who is both.
Talk about Brian like that. I think now that we've jumped all around the book, we've talked about the ending. I think it's that question we can open up the beginning. I want to read the first few paragraphs. That's all right.
I suppose.
Okay. So chapter one.
Good.
What?
Read it good.
I'm the best reader. I'm a librarian. I can read.
You can read all the big words.
Oh yes. In your. It began. It begins, as most things begin, with a song. In the beginning, after all, were the words, and they came with a tune. That was how the world was made, how the void was divided, how the lands and the stars and the dreams and the little gods and the animals, how all of them came into the world. They were sung. The great beasts were sung into existence. After the singer had done with the planets and the hills and the trees and the oceans and the lesser beasts, the cliffs that bound existence were sung, and the hunting grounds and the dark. Songs remain. They last. The right song can turn an emperor into a laughingstock, can bring down dynasties. A song can last long after the events and the people in it are dust and dreams and gone. That is the power of songs. So I want to read that because it really sums up why Anansi is able to defeat Tiger so often. Because the power of your words, the power of song, it's stronger than any amount of muscle that you can muster. Like it turns an emperor into a laughingstock. So Tiger was this fierce emperor. He was the king of his domain. and then this little spider comes along and just through wit and cunning and intelligence dethrones that great beast and steals all those stories and claims them for his own.
And throughout the book, we get Anansi stories where he is outwitting Tiger and making him a fool. We also get stories where Anansi loses because his cunning is too far above his own means, or he gets too greedy and thus he gets killed or made a fool of. But at the same time, he doesn't seem to be affected by those defeats as someone like Tiger is. Where Tiger is needing to show dominance all the time, or else he's lost all his power. Anansi can say, "Yeah, I still made a fool out of you in the process of my dying."
Yeah, and like at the end of the book, like Anansi's still dead, but it shows him in his coffin. He's just like, that's fine. I'll just hang out for like 25 years or so, and then I'll come back. Like he doesn't mind losing. He doesn't mind dying. He's just always thinking up new tricks, and whether they work or whether they don't, he still has fun. He still gets that story that he can tell. Even if he loses, he's never defeated. Whereas Tiger, all he's got is brute strength, and if he doesn't have that, then he is lost.
Yeah, and you can kind of see this tied into the development of the world throughout history, where in ancient history it was always by strength of arms and brutality to stay in control of the people, where in more modern times, in the last even just 300 years, it's been more and more battling people with your own wits. More and more wits, more and more verbal sparring than actual physical sparring.
It's become more of a chess match than all-out war. Whereas, like, even in ancient times, before humans weren't on top of the food chain, we as a species have gotten weaker as time has gone on. However, even back then, when humans were very much stronger, we were still some of the weaker creatures in the world, and we had to use our brains to find ways to survive. That's why we developed tools, we built shelters, we find ways to camouflage ourselves and develop clothing to protect us from the sun. All these survival tools is wit and cunning that other animals don't have. We do.
And also, the spider stories provide hope. They're saying, that a small, itsy bitsy spider can take on something like a tiger, that a spider bite can take down the mighty emperor of the jungle, the man eater, the thing that rules all, and something that can be stepped on without thought can still kill, and it's just a matter of, and still ensnare you in its web, and it's just a matter of outwitting those that think they're invincible.
Yeah, going back to that whole like lost but never defeated. Like there's that old that adage like you're never more than 12 feet away from a spider at any given moment. Whereas I don't know where the nearest tiger is from me, but it's probably not 12 feet away.
It's about 3.
Oh god. Why you never see tigers hiding in trees? Because they're so good at it. Getting to some of the themes, the opening paragraphs that I read introduces that theme right away of song, and song plays an incredibly important role throughout this story. It's how
That's how Anansi and his boys create the magic.
so yeah, it's how Spider, when he takes Charlie out, it's how he impresses all the women by going on to karaoke night and singing under the boardwalk. It's how
It's how Fat Charlie creates the narrative to beat the gods.
yeah, when him and Spider at the end of the story, they go into the god realm and they sing their story to the gods. That's how they win them over and how they manage to banish Tiger into his cave again. And there's also the theme of, I guess Spider kind of sums it up with, like we had song already, but when he goes out to with Charlie, he wants a night of wine, women, and song. So there's also that theme of wine, which pops up throughout the book, where a lot of characters do questionable things while drinking wine. For example, Anansi's neighbor, when Charlie's visiting her, she's drunk on wine and she reveals to Charlie that his father was a god. And then Charlie, drunk on wine, summons his brother to come to him by talking to a spider that he sees in his bathtub. And then Graham Coates gets drunk on wine while he's got Rosie and her mother stored away in his meat closet. He decides while he's drunk, all right, it's time to go kill them. And that, and he's drunk with a gun, and that kind of leads to him inevitably losing, because they managed to disarm him and get away.
Yeah. So, what is the joke with the lime, though? I mean, it was in the book description I read at the very beginning.
Yeah, it was one of the more intriguing jokes. So
Intriguing?
yes,
Really?
intriguing. Yeah, because it's weird because it doesn't really play out very well, but it's still very funny to read because it's when Charlie goes to the island to try and find his neighbor who's vacationing there, and when he lands, someone gives him a lime.
And he becomes known as the man with the lime.
Yeah, and so he's asking around, "Have you seen this woman? Have you seen this woman? Have you seen this woman?" And everyone he asks responds with the question, "Are you the guy with the lime?" And it goes back to talking about how those old women are just witches and are they know the story, they know how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and they have control over aspects of the story. So that's why she told everyone on the island that he's the guy with the lime. If you see a guy with a lime asking about my whereabouts, you can tell him because he's the guy with the lime. Of course, he never thinks to bring the lime with him, so he makes his life much harder on himself.
Okay, well, in that case, I guess we can start heading towards our final thoughts and conclusions, if you would like.
Okay.
I mean, I know there's a lot more in the book that we could talk about, but we might be getting a little redundant, especially with all the jumping around and who's a what's it. As my wife said, whenever you do these things, you need a thesis, which in the scientific world means a very different thing. So I had a hard time understanding. But the question I came up with for this book is, why does this book matter? I mean, we kind of discussed some of other Neil Gaiman's other books that, well, while me and Alex may disagree on the importance of them, that like we did discuss American Gods is this epic saga of American and European and New Age
Yes, gods all over the
gods.
world.
Yeah, and then you have Coraline, which is a childhood's nightmare of moving to a new home and having to find her place in this new world. You have Neverwhere, where you're discovering this new lands and the underside of the underbelly of London. So what makes this book so important that stands out?
So this book stood out to me for its humor. I am also I'm a huge fan of mythology in general. I really like Norse mythology mostly. However, African mythology is also very fascinating to me as well. I especially like Anansi as a character. Like I said, he's the second or third most famous trickster out there, but he's my favorite trickster. So any story about him, I love to give it a read. It really plays well with those old stories of Anansi, incorporating them into the storytelling, whether it's directly telling an old Anansi story or incorporating elements from other Anansi stories into the main plot lines. It's very entertaining, and it's very, I think, important to keep those old tales alive because that is that's a chunk of human history right there, wrapped up into a family comedy drama about coming to terms with your father dying and not actually being able to reconcile your history with him. And beyond that, I mean, the characters, they're very intriguing. They're very entertaining. They're all deeply flawed, even the ones that are supposed to be perfect. Like, I don't know, Rosie was supposed to be this perfect person. Is she? I mean, she's a very nice person. She's very kind. She's very sweet. But is she perfect? Absolutely not. Is Spider perfect? He's very far from it, even though
I think if you ask Fat Charlie, Daisy's kind of perfect.
he does wind up with her at the end. But yeah, they're all deeply flawed. Should Spider have been forgiven at the end for what he did to Rosie? I mean, at the end it's Rosie's decision, but or is it the author kind of forcing that to happen so that he can have a happy ending for every character? It's
Ooh, before we forget, we did mention mermaids. I know you had a little thing at the end of the book about the mermaid.
oh yeah, yeah. So I'm on read.
Talking about perfect endings.
Yeah, talk about perfect endings. Yeah, so the mermaid reference happens within the first two chapters of the book, and it's a quick little blink and you miss it paragraph of a story, but the book ends with Charlie and his son talking to a mermaid.
Yeah, the mermaid that he grew up talking to with his father, who then he believed was always tricking him into believing in mermaids. So he finds out his father wasn't just full of malicious tricks. It was partly his memory that was also to blame.
Yeah, and it goes well with the like I said, none of the characters are perfect. They don't end perfect, but they all show growth. Rosie, Daisy, Rosie's mother, Spider, like they all do, and even Anansi shows growth. Whereas,
I'm making faces
yeah,
at
yeah,
Alex.
even though he's dead,
And he's just like, I'll come back in
yeah,
25 years, 50
yeah.
years, something, and just continue my tricks.
Yeah. But even still, that last conversation that he has with Charlie, like it takes a lot to admit when you might have made mistakes, and like they know they don't have time to talk about it, but he does his best to show in his way that he really did care about his children.
Yeah, and I guess my final thoughts on why this book matters is it's a little bit more abstract. Basically, this book matters because it's an Anansi story. It's how people can overcome Tiger or just malicious evil. How that human predators are trying to send the world into chaos, and if people come together, they can defeat that evil. Where Tiger is chaos, and you could say the modern world is that a guiding force towards perfect order. Anansi is that balance between the two that you need to be able to thrive as a people. Without, if you're in total chaos, everyone's just so worried about looking in the shadows for the next thing that's going to come get them. But in a perfect world, there is no growth. You've already feel like you've reached that pinnacle, and there's no more going forth in the world or taking risks. And Fat Charlie was stuck in that order. He felt like even though he's just spinning his wheels, that there was nothing else to the world that he could enjoy, and where Spider could be kind of that chaos of just living moment to moment and not caring, and how again their father Anansi had to bring them to that balance through his mischief and through you know messing with Tiger again to make it so both of them could grow. And I think that's a good message to people is like, hey, you can't just be a leaf in the wind and blowing wherever it blows you, or getting yourself into all sorts of trouble. But at the same time, having your life completely structured isn't good for you either. Going up onto a stage and singing karaoke, may seem terrifying, but it's pretty insubstantial, but at the same time could have major good repercussions of self-confidence.
Yeah, like I think karaoke was a good idea for the that aspect of the story because it is something that like even if you suck at singing and you just get up there and embarrass yourself, like everyone's having a good time. It's
Yeah, no,
fine. And
no one really cares if you're terrible because they know if they go when they go up there, they're probably going to be
yeah,
just as bad.
yeah. Whereas like Charlie had that crippling fear of embarrassment and he couldn't do it.
Yeah. Even though he was probably one of the best singers that could have ever sang. So that is Anansi Boys. I hope our conversation of the story was interesting or entertaining, or
At least all the stuff I said.
if you enjoyed it, like and subscribe to us, and if you want to reach out to us, we have an email. It is kendallbookworms@gmail.com. That's KENDALLBOOKWORMS at gmail.com.
Yeah. Remember, two L's. Everyone always forgets the second L.
Yeah. So if you want to talk to us at all, or leave a contact us directly, go for it. Please be kind, or attempt to be kind. Alex is awfully sensitive.
Yeah, be nice to me. You can be mean to each other.
Yeah, I got thicker skin. Better looks too. So, what's going to be our next book?
Our next book is going to be The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black.
This is going to be my pick, and definitely one of my favorite books, especially in the vampire genre.
Yeah, if you like books that kind of subvert the teen vampire stories, this will be a good one to check out.
Yeah, and it's a YA, a little bit longer than Anansi Boys, but a quick and fun read. And for someone like me who typically despises YA, this is definitely a awesome book.
By a very talented author.
Yeah, by a very talented, underrated author. So, can't wait to discuss this book with Alex next month. So, until then,
This has been Bookworms.